everyone. Thank you for tuning in for the Canadian Real Estate Channel. My name is Kayla Andrade, also the founder of Ontario Landlords Watch, and co-hosting for the Canadian Real Estate Channel. And I have MacKenzie Wilson from the Alberta Landlord Community with us again to talk about how to deal with a difficult tenant in Alberta. It's different in many different provinces across Canada. And I know that Alberta seems to have things relatively in check and nice process in order to help landlords deal with difficult tenants. So MacKenzie, thank you so much for coming back on and being able to get in. Kayla. We talked about tenant screening, so check our previous video out regarding tenant screening. We did a little bit of role playing in that and how to help you and ask the right questions to your tenants so you can get a good tenant. But we do come into that time frame where we do get a difficult tenant or a bad tenant, a good tenant that went bad. Now, I know there's going to be multiple different ways of dealing with a bad tenant. So let's get ourselves into just maybe non-payment of rent for now, of how do you deal with a tenant who is not paying their rent. What does that process look like in order to try to evict a tenant in Alberta?
Great questions. Thanks, Kayla, for having me back. Super excited to be here. So yeah, let's dive in. Non-payment rent here in Alberta. How do we handle it? So I'm going to take the conversation in two places. We'll talk, the unofficial best practices, just like business practice, how to handle it. And then we'll fold in the legal side when it gets to that point. So what I try to do with all my communications, especially if they're verbal, is I will back them up with an email confirmation or a text confirmation, or ideally both, if it's a really important topic. So it gets rid of the hearsay, and I'm basically building my paperwork in the extent I have to go through the eviction process. I've got a really strong organized case because I have all the paperwork in place to validate my claims. So if, for example, my tenant sends me a text and says, "Hey MacKenzie, December's rent coming up here. I'm going to be a bit late. I'm going to do $1,000 here on the first, and then the remaining $1,500 or remaining $500 for a total of $1,500. I'll pay on my next pay period, December 15th, to say halfway through the month, for example." I go, "Okay, great. Thanks for confirming that, John Smith." And I'll repeat what he says. So I'm repeating. I'm not just saying, "Yeah, I got it." I'm repeating what he told to me, the show that I've actually read, and I'm on top of the conversation. I'll also just send that through email and just say, Hey John, just following up to our conversation today on the phone. You told me you're going to do your rent payment. Really appreciate the great communication. So the first is $1,000, and then on the 15th you're going to pay the remaining $500 for the total December's rent. Can you just confirm this is correct and I haven't made any mistakes? And then he goes back, half an hour later, he says, "Yep, that's right." And that's so important because now you've gotten written confirmation that he saw that message. Because what will happen down the road is it becomes a game of he said, she said, and I didn't say that on that date. Well, you never gave me chances. You didn't communicate with me. You didn't let me know about this or that. And having those layered documentation between your communications on different mediums is so crucial to that paperwork when it comes to time if you have to file for eviction.
And what if the person doesn't open up to you and doesn't talk to you on the phone to work at a payment agreement with you? They just totally ghost you, and they plan to stay in your property and live rent-free as long as they can until they get evicted.
Okay, so if they're just going to go right to hardball, they've broken off communication. Typically, before you get to that point, there should be telltale signs of how you've gotten there. But let's just say, you know what? We got a newbie landlord. They've asked that question. And this is their current situation. So first thing first is you want to post a 24-hour notice. You're gonna go visit that property and check it out. Go walk physically through your property and make sure see what the condition it is, because if that's the case, there could be probably more going on if the tenant's already gone MIA. So here in Alberta, we have the right to view a property with a minimum of 24-hour written notice. So part of that process is you post a notice on the front door. There's some key pieces of information that are laid out in the RTA. I believe it's your name, the time and date you're going to be visiting the property, your reasoning, aka inspection, and it's probably another piece too. And then you have to sign off on it. But anyways, it's a notice. It goes on the door. You walk in, and then you do your inspection. Let's say, what's our scenario here, Kayla? Do we have damages, or it's just non-payment we're dealing with right now?
Just non-payment.
Just non-payment. Okay. So what you want to do is, so we have two ways to approach this. If you have a history of non-payment, let's say they've been late, 3 months in a row, and they've been late they haven't been able to pay on the 1st, it's coming on the 5th, the 10th, the middle of the month, whatever. You've got that nice and documented, as we've already talked about. You don't have to go through this process called the 14-day eviction. Here in Alberta, we can do this process called the 14-day eviction. You post the notice on the door. You say, Mr. John Smith, I'm starting the eviction process, and you're going to lay out why you're doing this eviction process. Again, this could be like what we're doing in our example, non-payment, but also could be damages. It could be, bringing a pet in the property when there's no pets allowed. It could be smoking in a non-smoking property. It could do all these things. If the tenant, if you just bring up one issue, let's say you just do non-payment or rent, and they pay you back within that 14-day period, and it's actually 16 days. It's got to be 16 clear days. It's one day before the day you post the notice, then it's 14 clear days, and then it's the 16th day after the 14 clear days. So it's the full timeline of how fast you can move if you choose to use this process is in fact it's 16 days. And you post it, and let's say you just put one reason on, only late rent, and they go and pay the rent on the 13th day. Well, then that 14-day eviction is now null and void, and it's not applicable, and you continue on business as normal. If you have the intent, you want to get rid of this tenant, this is why you'd want to go do your inspection and find out that there's been any other lease breaks, breaking the lease rules that you have in place as well. I'm getting my language today, but breaches of lease, that's the word I'm looking for. And so let's just say in this scenario, we were able to find a few things. There was late non-payment rent. We found there's a pet on the property and there's supposed to be no pets, and they've been smoking. Let's say we've captured E3, and perhaps there's damages too. But we'll keep it simple. We got those three things. You would want to do your 14-day notice for as many things as possible if you have the intent to get rid of the tenant because they're not been a good tenant. If you go in my previous scenario, they are able to pay the late rent because that's what you filed the eviction, the 14-day notice for. And there was also, again, that illegal pet and then smoking in a non-smoking property. And you didn't list those two things. You have to restart the whole process all over again. And now you've just added another 16 days on to the earliest possibility of getting that tenant out of your property. So some things to keep in mind.
So pretty much include as many things within that initial notice. And then after that 16 days, and they still are living in the unit, they haven't paid and they haven't corrected any of their behavior, what do you guys do? Can you get the sheriff right after that, or do you have to go somewhere?
So there's a few more steps here. So we'll take this to the next step here of moving it forward. So let's say you already have enough paperwork to justify an eviction, multiple months of late rent. You've got some damages at play. You've got a bunch of lease breaches of your lease. So, again, smoking and non-smoking, illegal pet. There could be certainly more. Let's say you got 4 or 5 of these reasons. You can go straight to the RTDRS, which is the residential. Let me make sure I'm not lying to you folks. Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service. It's a beautiful acronym that the Alberta government's given us. It's this informal process where tenants and landlords can mediate and come to a resolution without the need of lawyers. So it's a streamlined process. It's very efficient. And quite frankly, we're very fortunate to have it because we can get in as quickly as in a few business days. And on the long side, it can take up to a month or 6 weeks, or 6 weeks, depending on how busy the process is. But
that sounds
typically,
awesome.
yeah, typically I would say you're probably looking from one to 2 business weeks is usually when you'll get your hearing. And since COVID, we do everything over the phone. There's not even a need to be in person anymore. So, and also because of depending on what precedence has been set for how you communicate with your tenant, do you do it over text message? Do you do it over email? Do you Facebook Messenger? Whatever platform. Generally, right now they will allow you to serve your tenant via that communication method. So previously, pre-COVID, it had to be a little more formal. It required a special way of serving. a lot more legwork to get done. We fortunately have improved upon that process and are allowed to serve in some of these more informal methods. So you can serve a tenant via email, for example. So let's go back to the situation. We've got nothing. We've done a 14-day eviction. Nothing's happened. I go right to RDS. It's a $75 filing fee, and I can file
That's
to
it?
have and lay out my paperwork and $75. And let's say it's a good week, and 7 business days, so about a week and a half later, I have my 15-minute phone call with an arbitrator or the hearing officer, myself, and typically the tenant on the phone call. Now, in saying that you can do this, if this is a new process to you, I highly recommend working with an eviction expert. We have a few of them on our community page, and they are worth their weight in gold. They typically cost about 1 month's rent, give or take. I mean, obviously there could be extras depending if there are additional, consumables or charges to go along if they have to do more legwork. But just to call ballpark right now, it's about 1 month's rent. It's typically
And what's their job description? Why would a landlord in Alberta want to pull this type of?
So you can choose to represent yourself or have an agent represent you on your behalf of this eviction process. Because it's so important how you frame your conversation. And most times the landlords that have gotten into this process are usually a little bit more emotionally involved because it's probably it's one of their personal home that they've had to move out. They couldn't sell. They just accidentally became a landlord, and all of a sudden now they've got a problem or professional tenant in place that's really taken them for all they're worth. So it's so crucial that I think that if you're new to the process, why not learn from the best? Most times I've seen people where they've gone through the process 2 or 3 times to try to evict someone, but because they didn't word their case right, because they didn't say the right thing, or they didn't have the paperwork in order, when they have a legitimate case, like if you've gone through if you looked at all the facts, but just because they didn't go through the right steps, they've prolonged the eviction process that could have been done in a matter of weeks to 2 or 3 months if it's gotten really bad, or even longer. So it's where you bring in one of these individuals, they'll cost you 1 month's rent, and they have it done in the first month, no problem. And then you've just saved yourself the headache and 2 more months of lost rent. So
Now, do these agents have to be licensed to represent the landlord, or like kind of landlords say, hey, my buddy's really good at speaking at these type of cases, and I'm going to throw him in, and are they okay with that as well?
yeah, so great question. So we use the word agent because that means it's anyone you can choose to represent yourself. We've got some of these eviction experts have really good track records. That's why we'll recommend them. They've actually made a business out of doing this, but they're not there's no official accreditation or certification or any of that stuff around there. Where if you go down the provincial route to provincial courts, you have to have a lawyer represent you, and that's a much more costly eviction process. But then again, if you're dealing with the damages over $50,000, that's typically when you have to go down that route. And the RTDRS, that more informal process, can't be used in that situation if you're, again, dealing with damages over $50,000.
Oh, wow. So now that you've been through the hearing, and let's say that you won your hearing or your case or your mediation, and they tell the tenant that they do have to vacate, how does that work in Alberta?
Yeah, so at that point, if you've gotten a judgment in your favor, let's say there's both an eviction date and say, $2,000 worth of damages, and perhaps another $2,000 worth of missing rent. So let's call it $4,000. Yeah, so that ideally the tenant will leave, and most times they do. If in the case that they don't leave, you would take that paperwork and you'd hire someone called a bailiff, and that bailiff is the law enforcement side that will physically remove that tenant from the property if they are, not leaving the property, if that's a problem. There's another challenge here that we haven't really touched on is, okay, I've been, in the eyes of the law, I've been awarded to get compensated for $4,000 in, missing rents and damages. Well, the tenant's not just going to give me $4,000. How do I go about collecting that? So I know that Andrew, you're very well aware of this, and this is one of my tools I use in the early days. I know they're now, it was Landlord Credit Bureau, they're now Front Lobby. Prior to that, when I was using, they're called tenant verification services, but they've progressed over the years. You guys have added more tools and services and functionality. It's very user friendly, and quite frankly, if you're any landlord in Canada, you should be using this service because there's so much, gives you a lot of teeth to help deal with these problems. So again, let's say we got $4,000 owed money. Let's say half and half rent, half overdue rent, and half is damages. I would first go through front lobby and file a trade line on the tenant's credit score. And what that is, it's just like if you don't pay a bill through TELUS or Bell or Rogers on your cell phone, and after a number of months they've given up, and then they go and register this trade line as well, and then they kick you over to collections. Now, how that differs from collections is like hiring a private agency. And they're also, if I understand this correctly too, I believe they're licensed by province. So there's certain legislation that runs these collection agencies. But at any rate, and then typically, depending if you have a big enough amount of money, if you're looking at 500 or 1,000, maybe even 2,000 bucks, these guys probably aren't going to want to pick up your file because they've got to make money too, and to chase someone down for that small fee or money owing, and they only get they typically collect anywhere between 30 to 40 or 50%, or maybe even more, 60%. They collect a big chunk of whatever they can get back for you. So if there's like $6,000 owed, let's do 10,000 for easy math here, and they have a 40% collection rate, and they're able to only collect. Well, if they got the whole 10,000, that means you've paid 4,000 out just to use a collection agency. Whereas you could do registering a trade line through the front lobby. What that does is it hits the tenant, and then the next time they go for a car loan, they're applying for a financial product, or they have to use their credit score in any way, they can't, because there's that nick on that thing, and any lender who's going to do a credit check will see that. And they're not. And most times, I mean, I can't predict what a credit card company will do, but given that they'll probably review and they'll see a trade line with money owing, will pretty much mean they'll say no to lending any future financial product to that person until they rectify that. And by rectifying that, they have to reach out to you, the landlord, and say, "Hi, Mr. Landlord, yeah, I owe you $4,000. I can't get my new car. I'm trying to buy this awesome F-150 with all the leather. So how can I pay you back the $4,000? Can I e-transfer it to you?" And no. Basically want to call you and set payment arrangements, and that's basically how that process works at a high level. Which is why it's probably more advantageous to go down that route, because to register a trade line, again, it's less than $100. It's actually quite a bit less depending if you're a member, a premium member or not as well. So that's really the way to go. I know I've given you I told you we're prepping for this call. I'm like, okay, Kayla, we'll speak in 30 to 45 minute segments. We'll let each other to riff and add on. And I just gave you 10 minutes of verbal diarrhea. So
it's totally not that, because you're taking us step by step, and when you look at the concept of dealing with difficult tenants, it's always going to be a step by step approach. And you brought us through that right from this is what you do right away from your 24-hour notice, knowing that this is your paperwork, this is what you put on that paperwork, because it's one piece of paper that you're writing down these infractions. A lot different the way other landlords handle it in other provinces, which makes me smile every time you talk about how you deal with serving different type of notices into the tenants, and knowing that you're getting quick resolution from your province in order to make sure that they are trying to be the full-on mediator, and knowing that there is another process obviously to go with where you are having to potentially have a lawyer that way, and obviously depending on how much rent is owed or damages, obviously there's a different route. And knowing that now that you got the piece of paper and you got them to leave, and you get to take that paper that would be from the RTDRS, where
your judgment. You're talking your judgment.
So and how long does it take for you to get your judgment?
Usually once the case is done, it's done. I think it's within. Don't quote me on this. It probably depends how busy they are, but I typically would say it would be within a day, if not of having that hearing.
So now you got your paperwork. You got your paperwork. You're giving it to the bailiffs, and now how much would be the bailiff to come and do an eviction for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, just simply like hiring a lawyer, like we have to put a retainer in, or using our eviction experts. Again, if there's let's say if there's travel outside the city, there's going to be some additional costs. But again, I would say you're probably looking around that $500 to $1,000 range to hire a bailiff to come on and enforce it. So, but obviously, if you've got someone that's very aggressive that you physically can't even go in your house to get out, it's $500 well spent that you deal with, and they don't even want you there. These guys and girls are they're professional. They'll go in. They don't even want the landlord around. They'll have that tenant removed, and then they'll come back and get you and give you possession back to your property and your keys. And
once they take over possession and to give you your keys back, and the tenant's stuff is still inside, can you just dispose of all that stuff that's being left after the bailiff has come and gone and given you the keys?
So there's yes and no. So let's go back a little bit high level. What we're talking about is more of a high level conversation. There are some more nuances if folks have to go through this process. Hence why I said please talk to one of our eviction experts, or hey, join our Facebook community. Ask the question. We've got about 33,500 landlords that might help you out. So, but to your point, let's say they've abandoned the house full of stuff. So it's I believe it's $2,000 is if you believe the value of the goods left is over $2,000, then you legally have to store it for a period of time. And I don't have the exact duration in front of me. I want to say it's like 30 or 45 days. Again, this is all in our RTA. And then yeah, you have to make it available to give back to them. If you believe the value is less than $2,000, let's say it's like a couple pieces of broken furniture, clothing, just not worthwhile stuff, then you're free to dispose of the belongings. So yeah, so
should the landlord take pictures of all the content before?
Yes, in this case, if you're in this situation, you'd want to be doing a documentation because you got to protect yourself, right? Again, you don't want to go into he said, she said, and hearsay. And then the only way you do that is take lots of pictures, document, get an Excel sheet going. If you can find market comparables for the price of goods. So I mean, again, I know dressers, if they're let's call them an IKEA dresser, for example, they're pretty cheap. They're brand new. They might be $300. Or I just saw a Kijiji ad that's selling it for $50, and then you could grab a link to that ad, or if let's say if it's Kijiji, for example, you'd want to download a PDF version of the website, print to PDF, because obviously the ads can expire and you'll lose your documentation. But you'd want to definitely do market comparables for items that are of the higher value, and that will help you quickly determine if you're at that 2,000 threshold or not. But at any rate, definitely document everything before you throw it out, because you might be asked if the tenant takes you to RT duress, they could countersue you and try to say, oh, you threw out my $2,000 Rolex and so on and so forth.
And if a tenant has been evicted and they want to come back at you, is there a certain time limit in which a tenant can bring you to the RTDRS in order to file against you? Is there a certain time limit?
There is, and I'm drawing a blank on it right now. I want to say it's 3 years, but don't put that in stone.
Don't worry, we'll get the. I believe we I think it's 2 years.
Chris is here.
Birdie's telling me. Don't let the surprise go, MacKenzie.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't even know.
So now that we're going to get into, so now that we have that, they can come back. It's always, again, back to your original advice is always document, and being able to show your proof and show that you've obviously done your documentation, knowing how much is there. And I guess the tenants know the RTA as well. So obviously they're going to know what to expect and know that when the sheriff does come, take what you can and know that there's obviously going to be that opportunity and that communication for the tenant to open up to you and say, sorry, things worked out this way, but I am planning to come back and get my possessions, and hopefully you work that into that conversation.
Absolutely. So in that case too, and I should just clarify, for us in Alberta, the law enforcement arm that does the eviction process, they're called bailiffs. So do you guys use sheriffs? And I'm learning now.
We got the sheriffs in Ontario.
Oh. Is that like
one sheriff?
Do you have to pay for that, or is that like is that covered? Because how does that work?
No, it's definitely going to be about the traveling as well, based on what city you are and how far they have to travel for the eviction. But you're typically looking at around $350 for the sheriff to come. But the best thing for us is that obviously we work on, type of garnishment of wages and trying to go after tenants' information. So trying to get their new address, trying to know where they work, and being able to garnish their wages, and knowing that they have wages that can be garnished. But again, we have to result ourselves back into initially doing our hey, right off the bat, telling your tenants that you do rent reporting, and being able to report their payment history to the credit bureaus of Landlord Credit Bureau and also Equifax. It puts that tenant on a very strong path of success, and knowing that they have something to look forward to, something to benefit from by making sure that their rent is on time. But now they obviously didn't care at the initial beginning, and now they've gotten themselves into an eviction with money owing. And this is where landlords can indeed register the debt through front lobby and get it to the Landlord Credit Bureau and to Equifax. And the best part is that your tenants can be notified. So getting your tenant's email address and giving them that welcome email to let them know what this platform and what this service is all about. And it also helps the email. It could be also sent out to remind tenants about paying rent, and also sends out emails to inform them that their rent is now late, or they now have been reported underneath collect. And this is where you can definitely utilize, after a tenant has now vacated the property, that you would use the collect feature in order to have it put onto their credit report, affect their credit history, and making sure that you're able to do it from previous tenants. So if you're just finding out about this, you can report your previous tenants going back 6 years into the Landlord Credit Bureau and into Equifax in order to hold tenants accountable for the agreement that they've made through their tenancy. And I think this is a great way for us to know that we're benefiting good tenants, and that you're able to protect good landlords. And it's a system that we've been yawning for many, many years, and it's luckily that it's now right across Canada except Quebec, and it's also into the United States. Now, I'm going to get you back on again, MacKenzie, because I think you're a wealth of knowledge, and I hope that we're going to be able to have Chris on live in person, so that he's able to give us
his Chris Noble. Absolutely. Hey, before we wrap up the show, I'm super excited. Could I leave you with a pro tip to help the folks? So I don't know, this could be, I'm speaking from Alberta, and perhaps correct me if I'm wrong here, Kayla, but we don't need, so if you have a contracted lease and you have, say, I was very clear when we were kind of talking about our examples before of both damages and, say, missing rent. If you have a contractual obligation in your lease that they have money owing, so let's say they haven't paid 2 months rent, you can go and file this trade line with the front lobby tool and start this collection process without ever going to any provincial or any government process through the eviction process, like through provincial courts or through RTDRS. You don't need to start that process because it's contractual. It's already black and white. It's absolute. You can start that trade line. Now, if you've got damages, that 2, 3, 5,000, whatever it might be, that's because it's subjective. That part would require a judgment. And once we have the judgment from the provincial authorities or the hearing officer, if it's through RTDRS, then that's when you can add in that information. So let's say you have enough damages that equals or is equal to the damage deposit. Let's say we have a $1,500 damage deposit and it's $1,500 worth of damages. Do the damages through the damage deposit. That's what that's for. You already have that money in hand. Subtract the damages, return whatever's remainder, do a statement of accounts with the tenant. And if there's anything extra, then you can put that towards lost rents, because it's so easy to apply that trade line for lost rents because it's already a contractual obligation on your lease. It's way more paper efficient or an efficient process to collect than run that through the trade line without having to go through the judgment process, which again, in Alberta, we are very lucky. It can be as short as a business week, or it can take up to 6 weeks depending on how busy they are to get you in. So.
Awesome. That was awesome. That's exactly, it's the strategy and how you do it, because so many people would, just try to go back there and get that judgment for the damages in order to be able to file it. So it's a great tips and tricks that we need to be learning as you are navigating through the different type of rules and regulations that you have file, and being able to hold the tenants accountable. MacKenzie, for anyone who's watching, how can they be a part of the Alberta Landlord community?
Yeah, absolutely. We're really in three spots on this beautiful thing called the intrawebs. You can find us over on our YouTube channel at findgreattenants.com. That's tenants with an S, plural. We have a lot of activity on our own private network. It's a private community. It's got news feeds. It's got calendars. It's got events. It's got topics. We're really trying to build the Wikipedia of landlording in Alberta, and we have a lot of great content on there. And that's over at albertalandlordcommunity.ca. And last but not least, we're also on Facebook. That's kind of how we started our roots here. We got a vibrant community there as well. It's over 3,500 feisty landlords learning the business. And we can just go into Facebook, go under the search for the groups and search Alberta Landlord Community. You'll see my beautiful mug alongside my partner in crime, Chris Noble, and apply the group. Just do note, because we are very diligent who we let in, you need to answer all the questions to get let in the group. And don't be surprised if a moderator or a community host or administrator reaches out to you for further questioning, because we want to make sure we get landlords a part of our community and our conversation. As it creates for a good, constructive, collaborative community when we have all people kind of figuring out the same goals. And it gets a little toxic when we have other folks in there that aren't the landlords. So we do keep that a very private community.
That is perfect. And that's what it is. Like, if you're in real estate, you need to be connected to a network. You need to be connected to a network for advice and also tips and tricks and different products and services that can help you be a good landlord. And if anyone is in the Ontario area and looking for a great community to be a part of, join Ontario Landlords Watch members on Facebook. We also have our public page for Ontario Landlords Watch, and we're also on Instagram, as well as Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm not crazy about Twitter. I don't know. Everyone goes to Twitter to complain sometimes, but it's a great way to still connect to investors all over the place, because we want to let landlords, investors, and property managers know right across Canada that there is support. It's not government funded. We are just landlords helping landlords, and I think together we can create that fair and balanced housing system right across Canada. So I want to thank everyone who is tuning in to watching the Canadian Real Estate Channel. Please share this with your network so that they can be a part of this community of the Canadian Real Estate Channel, because it's jam-packed with tons of experts who are there to give you advice and help you grow as an investor so that you can find financial freedom through real estate. I want to thank everyone again for watching. Subscribe and share. Thank you so much.
Thank you.